I never thought I'd find myself writing this down. But I need people to know. I need someone to understand what happened that night and why I walked away from the badge. I was always a man of facts. Hard evidence, proof, logic, that's what guided me through life. Ghosts? Demons? Supernatural nonsense? No thanks. I didn't buy into any of it. Not until everything changed on the night that still haunts me. It was a night like any other. I was patrolling with my partner, Paul, steady, quiet Paul. He and I had been partners for a few years now, ever since I joined the force. He wasn't the type to talk much. Mostly, he'd keep to himself, suck on those ridiculous lollipops of his, and get the job done. I used to make fun of him for it, but deep down I respected the guy. He was the real deal, a man who'd been through some things, but didn't wear it on his sleeve. Me? I was still learning. Still thinking that the job was about catching bad guys and solving crimes. I didn't know back then that some things don't have an answer. That night, we were driving through a small, forgotten neighborhood. The kind of place where the lawns were overgrown, the houses were worn down, and everyone kept to themselves. It was past midnight, the street lights flickering as we rolled by. The radio crackled with static, dispatch quiet until the call came in. Unit 45, we have a noise complaint in your area. A house on Delmont Street, been abandoned for years, but the neighbor says there's a racket coming from inside. Crashing noises. Could you check it out? I remember glancing at Paul, raising an eyebrow. An abandoned house? Noise complaints? Seemed like a waste of time, but it was part of the job. Paul didn't say anything, just nodded and turned the wheel, heading toward Delmont. The street was narrow and dark, the kind of place you wouldn't want to be after sundown. When we pulled up in front of the house, I could feel something was off. The air seemed heavier, colder somehow. But I brushed it off. It was just an old house, right? The house in question stood at the end of the street, 2 stories tall and falling apart at the seams. Paint peeling, windows cracked, the yard overrun with weeds. A real eyesore, to be honest. The kind of place that looked like it had been left to rot a long time ago. I remember thinking that it didn't surprise me the neighbors were hearing things. Old houses made noises, especially when no one was around to take care of them. We stepped out of the patrol car, our boots crunching on the gravel driveway. I knocked on the door, calling out, "Police! Anyone home?" For a long moment, there was nothing. Just silence. Then, slowly, the door creaked open. Standing in the doorway was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, her hair matted and hanging in front of her face. She was barefoot, wearing a dress that looked 2 sizes too big. Her eyes were wide and blank, like she wasn't really seeing us at all. I crouched down, trying to make myself less intimidating. "Hey there," I said softly. "Are you all alone here? Is there anyone else with you?" She shook her head, her lips barely moving. There was something about her, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I'd dealt with kids before, but this was different. She seemed detached, like she wasn't really there. Before I could ask her anything else, there was a sudden crash from inside the house. It sounded like a whole set of dishes had been dropped at once. I shot up, my hand going to my gun instinctively. Paul, beside me, tensed up. "You hear that?" I asked. He nodded, his eyes scanning the darkened doorway. The house was nearly pitch black inside, save for the faint light from the street. I turned back to the girl. "Stay right here, okay?" I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Paul stepped forward, his usual calm demeanor cracking just a bit. "Come on, let's get her to the car," he muttered, taking out a lollipop and handing it to the girl. "You'll be safe with us." As Paul led her to the patrol car, I turned back toward the house. Something didn't feel right. I wasn't supposed to go in without a warrant, but that crash had sounded too real to ignore. It was possible there was an intruder, someone squatting in the abandoned house. That would give me all the reason I needed. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The air in the house was thick, almost oppressive. Dust hung in the air, and the floor creaked under my boots. It smelled like something had been left to rot, a mix of mold and decay. I called out again, "Police! If anyone's here, make yourself known." Nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing and the distant hum of the wind outside. I walked further into the house, sweeping my flashlight over the walls. The place was trashed, furniture overturned, cabinets hanging open, dishes shattered on the floor. But there was no sign of anyone. Then, as I turned to head back outside, something caught my eye. A figure, standing in the hallway mirror. It was just a glimpse, but it was enough to stop me in my tracks. I spun around, expecting to see Paul behind me, but the hallway was empty. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned back to the mirror. The figure was still there, tall, distorted, like a shadow that didn't belong. It was watching me. I could feel its eyes on me, even though there were no features, no face. Just a dark, twisting shape. My mouth went dry, and I took a step back, my hand hovering over my gun. But before I could react, the figure vanished, melting into the darkness. I rushed back outside, my heart hammering in my chest. Paul was standing by the patrol car, his face pale. "You okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't answer right away. His eyes were locked on the house, his hand gripping the lollipop so tight it snapped in half. "Mike," he said finally, his voice low. "There's something wrong with this place." I nodded, glancing at the car. The back seat was empty. "Where's the girl?" I asked, panic rising in my throat. Paul turned to look at the car, his face going pale. "She was just here." Before we could say another word, the patrol car's siren blared to life, the lights flashing wildly. I jumped, instinctively drawing my gun. The car had been off. We hadn't touched anything. Yet there it was, roaring to life on its own. What the hell is going on? I muttered, trying to silence the siren. Paul was already moving, heading back toward the house. "Paul, wait!" I called after him, but he didn't stop. He walked straight toward the door, his eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. I followed him, my hand gripping my flashlight tightly. The house seemed darker than before, like the shadows were thicker, more alive. Paul stopped in front of a large mirror in the hallway, the same one where I'd seen the figure. "It only shows up in the mirrors," he said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to keep the edge of fear out of my voice. Paul didn't answer. Instead, he took a shard of broken glass from the floor and handed one to me. "We need to find it," he said, his eyes wide. "It's the only way." Before I could protest, he smashed the mirror with the shard, the sound echoing through the empty house. The air around us seemed to grow colder, the shadows twisting and moving like they were alive. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to admit that something was here, something we couldn't explain. But as we stood there, staring into the broken shards of glass, I felt it. A presence. Something watching us, waiting. And then, from the darkness, it came. A red, bony arm swung out from the shadows, slashing across my back. I cried out, stumbling forward as pain shot through me. Paul opened fire, the gunshots deafening in the confined space. The thing screeched, its high-pitched wail filling the air as it retreated into the shadows. We didn't wait. We ran. Out of the house, into the night, my heart racing in my chest. But when we reached the car, the girl was gone. The back seat was empty, the door still locked. There was no sign of her. The department didn't believe us. They couldn't. We were just two cops who had lost it in an abandoned house. The cameras in the car had shut off the moment we stepped inside. No evidence. No proof. Just our word against the impossible. But the missing person report told a different story. Maribel. That was the girl's name. She had gone missing from that house years ago, vanished without a trace.